Jersey. And we're going to shift gears quite a bit. I'm not going to be talking about data at all. I'm going to be talking much more about a process that I went through in the past year when thinking about how to influence policy outside of our, what I'm calling our research comfort zone. So as researchers and psychologists who are interested in social issues, many of us conduct research with the goal of essentially trying to change the world, right? I'm realizing I don't know where my, is it? This is, okay. So, I mean, we want to, we think that we can make, great changes, and like, how do we think this actually happens, right? Ideally, we spend our professional careers gaining expertise about a particular issue, or maybe even a handful of issues, and we publish and we present, and then when an issue arises and elected officials have to make a decision, they, or more likely their interns, will search databases and read our research and come to the right evidence-based conclusion, right? That's our goal anyway, but not so much, right? So there are some brilliant sessions during this conference to help us figure out how to get our research into the hands of those influencing policy. But in this talk, I want to think about what happens when an issue arises that doesn't align with our expertise, right? Are our hands tied in that? So essentially, I want to think about the tools that we have as psychologists, as psychological scientists, to help us respond quickly when policy issues arise, even when they fall within our kind of outside our traditional areas of expertise. So first, I want to think about what assumptions we make that keep us from engaging in policy work outside of our research comfort zone. And what trade-offs do we encounter when we're trying to do this work? So first, what I find is that we often make assumptions about what we can actually bring to the table. So we often forget that although we have areas that we do know more about, we are trained as researchers. We know how to gather information relatively quickly. We can synthesize information and synthesize distill main points very quickly. We also make assumptions about the influence that one voice can have and how much momentum that it can actually create. I'm also going to talk a little bit about trade-offs that we encounter when doing this work, specifically with regard to time and professional development. Now, I don't want to just talk about this in the abstract, though, so I want to tell you about a situation that arose in the town that I live in, which is Bloomfield, New Jersey, during spring 2018. So to give you some context, Bloomfield, New Jersey, it's a town of about 50,000 people. It's 12 miles, it's actually west of New York City. I don't know. That's a mistake. Didn't catch that one. All right, so it's 12 miles due west of New York City, and it's an incredibly racially diverse town. So our school district is the third most racially diverse district in New Jersey. And I have kind of some of the demographics up there. So with that, in spring 2018, our Board of Education approved a budget that included $550,000, another typo, for armed guards in public elementary schools and the public preschool, okay? I have two children, one who's in elementary school, one who will be starting one in the fall. And this was done, the Board of Education did this very quietly. They didn't inform the public, and after the funding passed, there was only a short article that ran in a local newspaper, just kind of noting this proposed change. Now, note that at this point, it was just the funding that was approved. So they didn't actually have any of the details planned out. But several parents in response attended the next Board of Education meeting, and after that meeting, from basically a conversation that started in the parking lot, decided that we became really committed to trying to reverse this decision, and this group that eventually became known as Bloomfield Families for Sensible Safety formed at this time. So my partner and I, who were both trained as social psychologists, found ourselves wanting to help, but neither of us had expertise in this area, and so we kept asking ourselves, okay, besides just expressing our opposition, what can we really contribute? So, like I said, not my area of expertise. I must say I now have the benefit of hindsight to recognize how much that really didn't matter. Because one thing that got me over this hurdle was no one in the group had expertise on this topic, in the group of people who were concerned about this. nor did anyone in the Board of Education, right? And they were the people approving the funding and for putting armed guards in the schools. So not being an expert didn't stop anyone from having an opinion. And early in this process, we saw this as an opportunity. So despite not knowing, again, this not being an area of expertise, we are trained as researchers and we know how to synthesize research. So how did we respond? Well, the first thing I did, I'm not kidding, this is actually what I did, is I went to the SPSSI website. And to see if they had any information about the topic. And so for those of you who don't know, and I have a little screenshot of the SPSSI website up here, there's a policy section on the SPSSI website, and the policy arm of SPSSI has an incredible amount of resources that are available to us. I didn't even realize the extent of the resources until I got involved in this issue. So when you go to the policy resources side, there are fact sheets, there are research briefs, there are position statements on a variety of topics. Now that being said, they didn't have anything related to armed guards. So the next thing I did was I emailed Sarah Mankel, who I didn't know at all at the time, and I'm like, is she gonna respond? I have no idea, I actually felt really bad. I didn't do people do this? She's a SPSSI policy director, she's here, thank you all so much. Employed full-time by SPSSI, and I emailed her to see if by chance someone at SPSSI was doing any work on this topic right now. Within hours, she responded with data and resources and connections to people. So with her direction and her advice, we were able to really quickly conduct a literature search and put together a fact sheet, attempting to mirror the things that were on the website. And we distributed this to members of what was essentially a grassroots movement that was emerging. And then we also created talking points to distribute to the parents who cared about this issue, but may not have had a research background, or again, people who had an opinion but didn't necessarily have evidence or kind of the talking points for putting together why this issue is so important to them. So within a couple days, we were able to mobilize, we were able to create basically a baseline of empirical knowledge that could be used by those in the group. So key point is that we are researchers. We know how to do this, right? We know how to synthesize and review literature. All right, so did people listen? Well, I can only tell you how this unfolded for us, and I'd say that the next steps happened actually very organically. We formed action groups. We developed strategies to influence Board of Education decisions. So we now had a fact sheet and we had talking points. We needed to make sure that folks in the town were aware that this was happening. Again, this was done very quietly, so we needed to make sure that, how do we just get the word out? We also needed to get information into the hands of the people making decisions. And we hustled. This does not happen on an academic timeline, right? This is happening every 24 hours. There's 5 more things that had happened. So based on the different skills that people had in the group, people really stepped up. We created a Facebook page and a website where we posted the fact sheet and talking points. You can see the website here. We started circulating the fact sheets and petitions opposing hiring armed guards for the schools. We had informal conversations with parents, so this was showing up early to kid drop off and showing up early to kid pickup and just talking with who is there. We wrote countless emails and made daily phone calls, not only to Board of Education members, the school superintendent, elected officials. We figured that if by the time, they needed to know about what the fact sheet said, because they were just gonna get sick of hearing from us, essentially. In a lot of ways, we exhausted them. And then the other thing that became really essential is we contacted the media, and we gave them our fact sheets, and we gave them our talking points. And we continued to contact the media and newspapers and television. And essentially we did everything that we could to almost write their stories for them. We wanted to make it as easy as possible for them to cover the issue. We also attended every Board of Education meeting and any other district meeting that we could. it became very clear that if we didn't have our presence very early on, that because of how hidden this issue was and how they tried to do this so quietly, our fear was that if at any meeting we didn't show up to, they would try to basically skirt this through without people paying attention, right? So not only that, but prior to Board of Education meetings, we organized ourselves so that speakers would each address different aspects of the issue based on the talking points and the fact sheets that the research that we'd synthesized. So, I mean, often there was a dozen or more parents and community members who were speaking out against guards during the public comment section of the meetings. And I have to say that aside from a spouse of one of the board members who offered comments and support from time to time, no one else showed up to speak in favor. We also protested. I mean, we went like old school protests, and contacted the media every time, and we just made sure that we had a presence. So this was before every Board of Education meeting. The Board of Education members had to pass us and collect, once again, the fact sheets and talking points as they were going into their meeting. All right. So did people listen? Well, some did. Some were compelled by the research we put together. The fact sheets that we developed became central to the conversation, but there were those who were not persuaded. They were elected officials who, in response to the fact sheet, said, "I'm not a numbers person, and you can find data to support anything." And then another Board of Education member said, "Don't you just feel safer when police officers are around?" All actual responses from the elected officials. During one meeting with a board member and a superintendent, one of the parents in our the Bloomfield Families for Sensible Safety group brought up that, accidental discharges are actually more likely than a school shooting, which was one of the things they were, wanting to protect against a school shooting. And one board member countered, "But I've never heard about an accidental discharge on the news." So back to what psychologists have to offer, right? So I would argue that we're in a unique position to engage with these arguments because we often understand the mechanisms underlying these arguments. So we understand logical fallacies. We understand cognitive biases. We understand heuristics, right? So in the case of the Board of Education member who said that she'd never heard of an accidental discharge happening, it actually gave us the opportunity to teach a mini intro-social psych lesson in this meeting about the availability heuristic. And we didn't use those words during this meeting, but we did explain the concepts. And in a sense, that was kind of a mini intervention we attempted to use. And I have to say, it didn't convince her. And there are people that we will not convince, but it actually convinced other people in the room. It compelled other people in the room, right? So I would argue that essentially there are skills that we brought as research psychologists that were central, right? That were to the eventual success of this movement. So I want to acknowledge a couple of the trade-offs, though, in doing this, because we face trade-offs both in terms of time and in terms of career development. So, for example, while working on this issue, we were not doing work that added to our program of research, right? This is important, particularly for pre-tenure folks. But I would argue that depending on your institution, and a lot of institutions are paying more attention to this, that there are ways that you can package this, package your involvement in ways that kind of count towards tenure or promotion. So for example, more institutions count service towards the community, towards tenure. Right? And so you can talk about this in terms of service to the community. You can also position yourself as being a consultant. So for the Bloomfield Families, I mean, this was a group that we created and then we consulted for the group we created, but it works, right? Depending on your institution, there may be other ways that you can navigate this tension as well. Another related trade-off is that this work takes up an immense amount of time. So in some ways we were lucky, as this issue really unfolded over the summer. So it would have been much more difficult to accomplish this during the academic school year, right? But even with it being summer, it really cut into our writing time. Once the academic year started, we pulled back in some ways. So we didn't participate in canvassing or distributing flyers at this point. We weren't able to attend all of the meetings. And in many ways, though, we remained consultants when it came to well, what does the research tell us? And I would argue that it's okay and it's even necessary to set boundaries around kind of what you are able to do, right? It doesn't mean that you're failing this effort. All right, so how did it all turn out? So ultimately, pressure from the group, from our group, a lot of media attention, and I would also think that there was an upcoming election at the time, and so it was getting a lot of attention, and suddenly people that had been very strongly in favor, initially the funding was voted in favor of unanimously by the Board of Education, except for one person who just didn't vote. So it went from that to people becoming like, well, I don't know, I need to hear more information. I need to hear the data. I need to hear the research. And we're like, we have that. But the Board of Education initially delayed the decision. So it was supposed to happen starting fall 2018, and they initially agreed that it would not happen in the coming school year. As a group, then, we were able to convince members of the group that we were active with, the Bloomfield Families Group, to run for the school board. And then we supported them. We campaigned for the candidates who supported our position. And after the election, we actually succeeded in flipping the school board. Some people who remained had changed their mind. Other people were voted out. And then in fall 2008, the Board of Education announced that it was no longer considering putting armed guards in the school, and that the money that had initially been approved was going to be redirected. So since then, the group has been approached by parents in other communities who are looking for support in starting similar kind of action groups in their communities. So I've given you as an example of how we as psychologists can inform policy outside of what I, again, call our research comfort zone. The fact sheet and the talking points were central to this effort. They led to a lot of successful interviews in multiple media outlets. It facilitated our discussions with the Board of Education and folks in the community. And despite these challenges and trade-offs, I would challenge us that, particularly in the current political climate, to recognize how we can influence policy, particularly on state and local issues. And again, I just need to thank, so Chelsea Prill, who was a SPSSI fellow at the time, that summer when this happened, put together work. Sarah did amazing work. Leah Werner was also really active in this. She took care of most of the media interviews and things like that. So, and then Bloomfield Families and SPSSI, so many resources for really getting us involved and helping us to do policy work. So, thank you.